To make this ride as much of a joy to drive as it is to look at, Wilwood has developed a high-performance big brake kit. Remove the factory dust cap, cotter pin, castle nut, a few internals of the drum assembly, including the factory retaining springs and piston need to be removed. You gain access to the bolts that will hold the drum brake backing plate to the factory spindle. It's important to clean the spindle flange surface. You need to assemble your new Wilwood hat and rotor. Torque the bolts to 155 inch-pounds. Pack the two supplied bearings with the proper amount of disc brake grease. Install the wheel studs using red Loctite. Drop in the greased inner and outer bearings and your hub's ready to go. Manufacturing processes of the 50s and 60s produce inconsistent castings. A small amount of grinding may be required where the edge of the spindle and the edge of the inboard bracket plate meet. All the bracket bolts should fit straight and flush without interference. Start with the bolt that passes through the backing plate, spindle, and factory steering arm. Torque the lower two bolts to 47 foot-pounds and the upper to 140 foot-pounds. The caliper carrier bracket will need to be shimmed, but before final assembly, these bolts will need to be disassembled and reassembled using red Loctite. Slide your newly assembled Wilwood hub onto the spindle, making sure the bearings stay in place. Install the keyed retaining washer and castle nut. Install the cotter pin and dust cap. Slide the rotor and hat assembly using the supplied hat locator screws. Start with two shims on the caliper carrier studs. Install the brake line fitting into the caliper with the outlet facing down. Slide the caliper onto the studs. Tighten down the caliper to 30 foot-pounds. Check to make sure the rotor is centered in the caliper. If it looks centered, go ahead and install the pads. You also want to check the outside edge of the rotor, making sure it's flush with the outside edge of the pads. Disassemble the caliper and bracket. If any adjustments are needed, you can add or subtract the supplied shims. Once you've made any necessary adjustments, apply red Loctite to all the bolts. Reassemble the bracket and caliper and torque everything back down to the recommended specs. The supplied Wilwood flex line can now be installed. Remove the OEM rubber hose from the fitting at the hard line. Reinstall the Wilwood flex line and secure it with a clip. The route of the flex line should not interfere with any moving parts. Before you take to the streets, bleed the brakes and follow the braking instructions carefully.